Dear friends, good morning. Thank you very much for having me in the first place. To yourself, Indu, for moderating this so competently. To the organizers, the General, Giovanni, Jose, Tiziana, Miriam, and the others who are making this such a valuable forum. It's valuable, and I will come back to it again and again. I think you asked us, Indu, for one thought and one recommendation. I will start with that, and then I'll develop something else along the same lines. If there is one message I would like to hammer home, it is that we continue to meet and understand each other and listen to each other, and that we make this a rolling project that spans months and years. After all, trust takes time. And this is what we are after. And I'm very happy that we have people in the room to co-create thoughts and policy. We shouldn't do it in the West ourselves. As much as the Africans shouldn't be left to themselves to develop their own responses, but where relevant, have support from Western actors. My background is in the Ministry of Defense, civilian, but also in think tanks and academia. I have worked for the corporate world as well. And in June, I have concluded my mission in Riga at the NATO Stratcom Center of Excellence as Slovakia's senior national expert. I will start out by laying out the research that I established at the center, which is now taken over by Bonnie, whom I encourage you to meet, and the charming lady, a Canadian lieutenant colonel, in the last row, in order to find cooperations and synergies there. We have come up with a framework for looking at Chinese and increasingly Russian information operations across Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. And we have applied it to a range of case studies. In the first year, we have analyzed Kenya, Mali, South Africa, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates. This year, we are looking at India, Indonesia, but more close to home, to the Sahel. We're looking at Côte d'Ivoire, Niger, and Burkina. And next year, it's most likely to be the Latin American focus, so that we have a full range and understanding. Some strategic and some operational recommendations came out of the report. One is that NATO should establish an entity, or better, maybe even a network of entities, to shift the image from an aggressor, or even a non-entity really, but shift the image from aggressor to a cooperative partner. We don't call it a global south. That's a very imperfect term. We call it a multi-aligned community, but the term is developing. Using a flexible model, and it should not be headed by former colonial powers, which are also in NATO, but the majority of countries in NATO don't have a colonial past. It should be led by Central and Eastern European nations who in their turn have been victim to colonialism from the Soviet Union in the past. So we have better credibility as we reach out. This is the first strategic recommendation. Another, and there are three, to align values. There's a lot of pushback and skepticism about universal values, even values in the UN Charter, because many actors on the ground tend to see them as Western imposed or Western owned values, that even to democracy is not an African concept, which we have seen yesterday. So we should reframe these values in very local language and political guidance that countries in the region know themselves. The African Union has a set of values and interests it based its foundational documents on. Elsewhere, ECOWAS, although it has economic in the title, it reaches out into social, cultural, political affairs as well. It has also foundational documents that arguably are very complementary if not identical, with what we call universal values. So we should speak the language people on the ground understand, while meaning very often the same things. Third strategic recommendation, countering Kremlin narratives entails a multi-dimensional approach. It's not just military, far from there. It's really the battle space is the mind. So we need using a mix of traditional and digital media to reach diverse audiences. I'll come back to the audiences later as time allows. At the operational level, our reports, now the second one as well, says that we need to stay ethical in counter narratives. Trust, after all, and the belief that we are telling the truth rather than lying systematically, like the adversary, is arguably our single most important advantage over the rest. Civil society engagement, I will not repeat that. We've heard enough yesterday. Also in terms of practical, there's a lot of beautiful initiatives on the ground. The question is, how can we work together with those relevant initiatives and empower civil society? Really, we need to get better or start local language campaigns. We just don't have enough experts in the multitude of languages in the theaters that we are actually operating, whether it be direct operations or missions, training missions, etc., advisory. Objective engagement. We need to acknowledge that the Western system has flaws, that we have failed in some respects. We are not perfect because our political systems, our military systems, everything are a human creation. We have failed ourselves. And hoping that the other side also acknowledges and comes in a much more humble way to the table. Because it's what the authoritarians accuse us of. It's domination, it's colonialism, it's patronizing, etc. It's absolutism. And we want to counter that by coming more realistic to the table. And the limits of our knowledge also acknowledge those. And the last thing is another thing that came out in very prominently yesterday. Of course, we need more on-the-ground knowledge and research and in-depth understanding of Kremlin influence to remove bias from our own research and understand, for example, those channels that we are not able to perhaps monitor as systematically as we can the social media today. Radio, even rumor was mentioned, and all these things that circulate around the people in the sort of person-to-person offline space. But to conclude, personal engagement trumps digital engagement. It is my very own firm conviction that if we meet
It appears there's a problem with it.
In the Sahel region, because actually we are the European country closer to Africa, to the point that we even have some territories in Northern Africa that can be used as a sort of thermometer to feel the temperature of the continent. It means that whenever something happens in the Sahel region, we feel it almost immediately in the Canary Islands, in Ceuta, Melilla, etc., and in Spain itself. For instance, as you know, since last summer, the Russians have conducted a military campaign in northern Mali, and that is producing a flood of refugees fleeing towards Mauritania, Senegal, and Morocco. And many of these migrants are escaping and going to Europe through the Canary Islands. What I want to stress is that whenever something happens in the Sahel, it has a repercussion in Europe. And the country that is feeling more right now this repercussion is Spain. The way we see this second session, or I see this second session, is to try to find a proper strategy to tackle this problem. Because yesterday we were discussing about Russian and Chinese influence in Africa, but we are NATO, and we have to think, how can we do something to tackle this problem? Because actually, as you know, NATO approved some years ago this 360-degree approach, but it was a political statement with not a practical consequence. NATO is very much focused on Ukraine and doing, I'm not saying nothing, but almost nothing in the southern flank. That for us is not any longer a southern flank, but a southern front, because actually we are fighting a hybrid war in Africa against Russia and to a lesser extent, but also against China. So we need a strategy, and we need a strategy right now, because the way we see it, at least in my country and in the institute I represent, is that if we do nothing there in Africa, the Russians will try to harm NATO nations and the alliance itself as much as possible, based on a very basic principle. We, the NATO, we are trying to harm the Russians in Ukraine and to weaken Russia and even to defeat Russia in Ukraine. They will do the same in the southern flank. So if we do not take appropriate measures, what we are noticing right now is only the point of the iceberg of what might happen in the coming years. So we need a strategy, but I will elaborate about it later on.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So it's my turn. I would like to thank the organizers for this invitation. It's a great event. I learned a lot of things yesterday, and I'm looking forward for the discussion. My background is on international relations and strategy. I'm a professor at the University of Piraeus. Among other things, I teach strategy, intelligence, cyber security, hybrid operations, and part of my research is on Russian influence. I prefer the term influence, it's more flexible. Influence operations. So what I'll do in terms to make a very short, let's say, statement, I will use, like we do in the military, an approach that looks at some issues at, let's say, at the strategic level, and then at the operational level. I'll leave, let's say, the tactical level for the last round table. So at the strategic level, I think we have to take a step back and think of how we see the region. The ambassador earlier and IGNACIO earlier mentioned a few things. I think we have to really think carefully of how we perceive this region, what we expect from this region, what we want, what we can offer. So are we interested, let me put it this way, to the Sahel region only because there is Russian and Chinese influence, disinformation? Are we interested because of mainly security threats that I don't need to elaborate right now? So how important is Sahel for us? Do we see Sahel as, another, let's say, battlefield in terms of global influence with other competitors? But to give you a rough idea, we have BRICS plus, who knows, maybe tomorrow morning, there will be a country from Sahel looking to be part of the BRICS plus or any other institution. So we have to really think at the strategic level of how we approach this region. Anything we might do on the, let's say, information, disinformation slash, it's one of the many things and one of the many tools. So I'm not sure, I'm not either pessimist or optimist, I'm not sure whether we have a clear understanding of what we want and what we can achieve in terms of the Sahel. My understanding is that, getting from the problem to, let's say, the solution, that we know the region, we know the problems of the region. So if you have an unstable region, if you have a region that has, fragile states, that has many problems, it leaves a lot of room for other actors, for other competitors to get in and to do influence. So if the region becomes, in the near future, hopefully, more stable, more democratic, more resilient, that is part of the solution. And this word, democracy, resilience, stability, do not only have to do with information and disinformation. And the ambassador mentioned earlier, about the idea about a great Marshall Plan, whatever, they didn't stick. We have to think on the long term. As Mario mentioned earlier, I think that this is, let's say, a long-term strategy to achieve a certain goal in the region. In the midterm, we have to work on two things: trust and legitimacy. We have to gain the trust of, let's say, let me use the term targeted audience. And I go with the proposition that Mario has done. I think in terms of both, if I may say, NATO and the EU, because many of the member states are obviously common, certain member states have a comparative advantage. And they are centered obviously in the East and the Central Europe. So there's no bad legacy of colonials going there, doing bad things, etc. So whether it's the EU, whether it's NATO, whether it's any initiative, it's good to put those, let's say, countries in the front. At more, in a way, let's say, operational level, and I would see it as a grant, if I might use the word, strategic communication campaign. And I will use a term, the term of the panel is weaponization of information. So I think we should do the same, but instead of information, we should weaponize truth. That is our comparative advantage. So I will put it in a dilemma. How can we win the hearts and minds of the Sahelians? If you look at what Russia and China has done, it could be a dilemma or not, we could do the same. But going on our ethical constraints, obviously we cannot do the same. Otherwise, we're gonna be the same as them. So we have to, in a positive way, use the term weaponize information, weaponize truth. Weaponization, I don't see that as a bad thing. The weapons are bad and good. It's a tool that can protect you. It offers you security. It offers you deterrence, etc. So we have to be more proactive in terms of spreading the message, spreading in a very, let's say, proactive way, learning from the mistakes we have done. NATO and the European Union, recent mistakes regarding Ukraine, of how, to have a coherent argument, coherent line. That's not obviously easy. Mm-hmm. And we have to, at its, let's say, country at its level, we have to disseminate a very tailored message. I think that, and our regional experts here know this better than me, that we cannot see Sahel as a common, let's say, region. There are different countries with different problems, with different targeted audiences. Even if we look at the information media environment, it's some cases you have radio as being, let's say, more popular, other areas where internet access is not number one. So we have to have, tailored made, let's say, strategic communication programs for each country. I do not have the answer to all this, but I think, as Mario said, and we have discussed this yesterday as well, the answer, whatever answer is, that the information, the communication packets has to be framed and delivered in a way that highlights and respects the local cultural context and obviously the linguistic context. And that is also a nice idea to think even in terms of artificial intelligence, and mentioned earlier, the large language models, they have to work with the local data. You have to feed those algorithms with the local language, with the local data. One final point, as I said, I'll leave the more tactical aspects to the last roundtable. I know that it might sound provocative in a way. When we discuss, use any term you want, propaganda, misinformation, disinformation, or whatever, we have to control the information environment. I know that control might not sound very nice. We have to influence, we have to shape, we have up to a point, sterilized this information environment. So, as I said earlier, the only way I see that we can do is to weaponize, in a way, truth, to show our point of view. We had some ideas yesterday, like, okay, this is how the EU gives money, there are certain conditions, and this is how the Chinese do their business. So be honest and compare it. And in the end of the day, we have to spread the message. It's up to you, the Sahelians, to choose whether you want option A or option B. Again, using, whatever, rewriting history. Fidel made a good point yesterday about, how do we understand the legacy, the past of Soviet Union / Russia about being, despotic, authoritarian. So maybe some people don't know this. Maybe we have to, re-educate people, spread the message out there in many terms with the academic, being a partner as well, and spread the message of who are those actors and what are they doing. I think that we have, from what I understood from the yesterday's discussion and so far today, we have a very good understanding of what the other competitors are doing. It's not like, it's, oh my God, we have been shocked, it's a surprise. We never thought about it. So there are many things that we already know. And I know that many of the people on the audience are aware of the hybrid terms. So there are many tools, both in NATO and the EU, about like the rapid response teams. So we can build on that. The hybrid is a more general context, but you can apply it up to a point to the Sahel region and have, let's say, deploy rapid response teams in terms of strategic communication. If you know that, elections coming up in this country in like 6 months, you have to send somebody, whether it's a private organization, whether it's a media company, whether it's, let's say a team, a rapid response team, either from NATO or the EU, to assist the government. I am aware, and many people highlighted yesterday, that in many cases, we cannot see the countries, the governments there as, let's say, legitimate partners, because they have their own interests. We have some junta, we have some authoritarians being in charge. So we have to think also in another way of approaching other people, other institutions, other actors, other players, whether that's the non-governmental organization, whether that's civil society, whether it's the private sector. I think that's the only way we can, work on a strategy that is not going to give us results in a couple of years. I see this in a long term. I think that this has, a strategy, a project that will take, unfortunately, decades. But we have to work from now, from tomorrow morning, in order to build this resilience, to offer these tools to the Sahelians, to protect them from outside interference. And my final, let's say, sentence is that for me, and I think Mario might agree with that, the narrative in general should not be that Sahelians should be anti-Russian or anti-Chinese or pro-France or anti-France. I'm just joking. Is anybody from France here? I think the narrative should be that we need, and we wish that Sahel is free, democratic, and resilient. So this is something that will gain the trust. It's the first thing. I mean, if I don't trust you, if I see you as an enemy or as another one that will come and occupy and take advantage of me. So I don't want Sahelians to be pro-French or, let's say, pro-German or whatever, or anti-Russian or anti-Chinese. Ideally, I want them to be resilient, democratic, free, and they can choose whatever they want to choose. So I think that is, the underlying message for the region. I'll stop here and have some thoughts on maybe the last part.
All right, thank you so much. So we go straight to our friends who are online before we come to the ones who are here. So if I could start with Fidel. Fidel, your 3 minutes thought on weaponization of information. Incidentally, I like this idea of weaponization of truth, but let's see what you need to say.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the insightful submissions. And I would like to say that everything that I've heard is workable, especially the person-to-person cooperation and partnership. It's very important because, as I said yesterday, when you have academics spreading false news or fake news, if you hear retired military officers who have think tanks projecting certain narratives that are not factual, then you need to equally get people who can counter this. And as has been said, not necessarily spreading counter falsehood, but being more factual and speaking the truth. For instance, admitting that French post-colonial policy in West Africa did not work is a very important step. Because currently, people say the liberal system has collapsed in Africa. But I always say that we must separate what failed from what is working. Because if you look at most of these countries that have been taken over by coup makers or the military, you realize that they are all Francophone. And why do we have that common denominator? Because the post-colonial French arrangement in that region did not work. And so that has fed into Russian propaganda, and that is working. So first of all, you admit that this did not work. And going forward, that kind of partnership should be redefined. And then you go on to counter the falsehood that Russia will keep spreading. For instance, the issue of Russia being the savior of the people. How is this happening? A country that uses a mercenary group to take your resources in exchange for security that is effectively security for the military government and not for the people, it's not a country that is a reliable partner. And when you say this currently, many people are realizing this fact on the ground because then it is affecting them. People are saying that Wagner is in Mali not because of the people, because the people are still suffering under extremism. And the countermeasures that Wagner has pursued has been indiscriminate killing in central Mali and northern Mali. What they do is that whenever there is an attack, they occupy a community and engage in ethnic profiling, where Fulbe and Tuareg communities face indiscriminate attacks and summary executions. So these are some of the things that are supposed to be out there for people to see the difference between partnership that has positive future against those that are exploitative. And I believe that this is my opening statement on this, and with other provided solutions, things can change over time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Beverly, your turn.
Yes, I mean, I do agree with a lot of points, and I think the thinking around re-engagement with not just the Sahel, but wider Africa on how to counter misinformation, what kind of networks you need, local languages playing a very important role, and that personalized sense of connection, because that's what has been missing for a long time. And the re-engagement with the region should factor in that admission of certain errors, whether it's military or logistical errors, whether it's past mistakes. It's sometimes that acknowledgement is enough to soften one's stance, especially when you're dealing with hardline governments, where you're dealing with them exploiting those narratives as a way of justifying their hostility towards them. There are still lots of room for engagement, because humanitarian aid is one entryway through which I think the West can remain present and relevant in the region. The weaponization of truth is interesting because we're still using a lot of very strong military language. And I suppose thinking about it as narratives instead, or finding more practical ways to be able to disseminate those alternative or counter or more informative, actually informative is probably the right word, because it's one thing to constantly be antagonizing Russian narratives. It gets you nowhere. It just means that you're constantly in this cycle of this person said this, but this person said this. And that's probably what Russian narrative machinery wants. But it's another thing for you to simply hold up what it is you're doing. So if it's a women's initiative, if it's a media initiative, a youth initiative, and it stands on its own, and people can see the impact, because as I pointed out yesterday, the perception that pro-Russian or pro-Kremlin narratives is completely mainstream is slightly false. If you look at northern Mali, by contrast, there are people who heavily relied on the UN peacekeeping mission, on the Takuba task force, and on various other European Western-led initiatives that have now drawn down drastically from the region as a result of hostilities with the military government. These were instrumental in terms of making sure that people were having employment, so they don't have to join any militia, militant, or jihadist groups. These were important for social empowerment. These were important for driving the peace process that started in 2015. And those things kind of need to come back. There's also the idea of taking advantage of certain moments. So, you know, the idea of sending observers for whichever election there is that's taking place to make sure you're in touch with the political developments in as much as the conflict and the security and the media developments. Having that pulse is extremely important. But by and large, hopefully through the exchanges here, it's possible to find more amicable solutions and more timely process through which you can address, because we think about how quickly media is changing within the region, and that's the point of the information which is reaching out to people. That flexibility and that agility and being able to understand how those environments operate is extremely important.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I don't know if we have AKU, otherwise we'll go to our experts here in the room, but I'm not sure he joined today from Cameroon. Probably network, probably he will come in later on. So let's start with Joshua. Joshua, your 3 minutes contribution. No, you should sit, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you, Nato, again. The moderator, you have been doing very well. Basically, the Sahel and Africa in context that we have been discussing in the past one day, and today is the second day, has been a major issue on the table, and it has come from different perspectives. But one thing that I know is that the Sahel is presently a region of focus that needs serious intervention. Secondly, the Sahel is already flooded and negatively impacted upon by both Russia and China. And these negativities has really given the Sahel a bad image. Unfortunately, the target has always been the citizens. Also, even the governments have become seriously incapacitated on both sides, deliberately by themselves to perpetuate themselves in government and to continue to entrench themselves and clinch to power. And secondly, they are also feeling so helpless in one way or the other, trying to play as if they need help, and thereby these vulnerabilities, this fragility, this tension field are now giving more leverage to both China and Russia to be able to penetrate them and use different means, different ways of disseminating and giving information. Unfortunately, false information, bad information, and they are using the digital infrastructure on ground. For example, you see the Chinese state media brought to Sudan, and now even partnering with the local media in Sudan and using the media to try to portray and send information out there to show that China is the only good partner for development, while the West, they are not good partners. So you can see us on ground and thereby trying to confuse, not convince, confuse the people in the place to think that China is doing something or Russia is doing anything that is good. And Russia has created radio stations. Russia has created even print media, sharing bulletins all over the places. So all the West needs to do now, particularly NATO and the EU, is to come in and change the narratives. Changing the narratives coming from a very strategic perspective. So there is need for strategic engagement. And in this strategic engagement, the partners, the audience, and even the government are to be independently dealt with. And the choice of information, truth, fact-checked, all of these must be embedded in the approach that we be used in engaging the governments in the Sahel. And I know from this, a lot of good things will come out from it, although it will take a while because the Chinese and the Russians, they have eaten so deep negatively, forcefully into the fabrics of the society of the Sahel. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we pass to Papa? 2-3 minutes?
I'm not sure I will intervene here because great and good things has already been said. So I would better pass, and because technical, the next will come.
Yeah.
I will, because I now hear my technical heart.
Okay.
So I will more engage on the technical and the technology side, because at the end of the day, you will face the technical and technology side.
All right. Thank you.
So I prefer to be there.
Aisha.
Thank you. I think most of the things actually have been said. I would want Beverly to talk about the Africa Stream case. I think you're following that. It would be good to share because some believe Africa Stream is an anti-imperialist media, while the US believes it's a Russian mouthpiece. So I would want to have clarity, and I think it's important to share that, because I think this is the first time that we have a platform actually being taken down by almost all tech companies.
Thank you so much. We're going to throw open to folks to start making contribution. But before you do that, I'm going to cash in on 2 things that came out from the discussion this morning, which is people to people. How important is that? I will show you an example. I'm Nigerian, I'm British. But I find out that most times I can't buy, or if I want to mix my wares, I don't want to buy British suits because they're very costly. Do you know what I buy?
Tell me.
Turkish suits. And I buy them from Nigeria. Do you know why I buy them from Nigeria? When I convert my money, the money I will use to buy my Turkish suit, like the one I'm wearing, is what I would have used to buy one British suit. A lot of Nigerians travel to Turkey almost every day to buy wares. Can you see that cooperation between ordinary Nigerian who is a businessman and folks from Turkey? That is people to people. Meaning that if you come to Nigeria and give a Nigerian a Turkish suit, he's more likely to buy it from you. And he sees it, this is where I can get all my wares. People to people. Now let's look at the Chinese in Nigeria. Ordinarily, 10 years ago, if you give a Nigerian a Chinese product, he will not touch it with a mile. He will run away. He will tell you it's fake. But because of the saturation of the Nigerian market by Chinese product, in the absence of no other, he has no other alternative. Am I saying the truth?
Yeah.
This is very important. People to people. So when we start thinking, we should start thinking, how can businesses in Europe, in America, start producing products dealing with businesses in Africa and creating that enabling environment that starts changing the narrative. It's not only about government, it's about people to people. So I open it up for other contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a couple of points here. Some will touch like both people online there. So Fidel, I like your way that you talk like about all the academics, because if we want something in the long term, I think using the school system, university system is the way to go. So we want to make sure that they reach a certain level. And I don't know if inside the system right now there's any critical thinking like courses, or is there formation that could be added, yet that could be like part of a degree, So you make sure that each individual has this knowledge. So instead of having one or two guys that's going to fight the fight against the misinformation, like every student getting out of the university would have this knowledge in order to fight against them. So I don't know if it's something that exists, but I think it would be a good idea if the education system would implement this kind of courses. Now, let me go with my 4 points, and we can probably go to you after that. Now, on the other side, more like Beverly, I guess, suit. I know that there's like lack of job. They're talking like lack of job a lot in the countries. Was there like any way to either get some kind of units or specific formation for like fact checkers? I mean, like some group that could be probably like a subdivision of media or something like that, that would get, it would be actually a job to go through either like the different countries, different places, just to make sure to connect with the people and then use the media in order to share that knowledge. So if there's a lack of job and we can have some of these people getting like media formation and fact check formation, and then use them inside their small community in order to pass the information and get the, you said something like, if there's nothing interesting for the radio, this is when it's easy to do misinformation. So these people can be used in order to do their own research with the tools that going to be given to them, and then use the media in order to entertain and make sure that the people are getting all the facts. So that's something that more on your side, which touch something that probably you two could think about or like talk about. I'm very glad we saw the ambassador presentation just before you guys, because there's one thing that we saw inside this presentation that we've never seen during the 2 days, and it's a freaking rapper like doing rap about Putin. So this is something major if you want to hit the new generation. We are talking of music, we are talking of streamers, we're talking of kind of like heroes for them. So I don't know if there's this kind of figure right now in Africa that can be used. It could be like an old Olympic champions that convey a message that people can relate to. So this kind of like heroes of streamer would touch the heart of the young generation, and I think it would be a good way to fight on one side of the spectrum. So it's more like bottom up than like top down, but I think this is the life today. So everybody's online, looking at Twitch, Discord, name it. There's so many platforms, and having these streamers giving a good message, giving the truth, might be like a good way to touch the heart of the youngest people. Then my last point, there's a lot of talk of informing the people about the misinformation and like the option, like Chinese is an easy button when you need money. But is there like information regarding talking about the what is the next step? Yes, it's easy money, but if you have a blank check, you might have blank consequences also when you cannot like give the money back. So this other side, I think maybe we didn't hear a lot about it. So say the Chinese might come like to get your resources if you're not able to pay. So I don't know if this message is conveyed to the people, but that might help to the balance when you look at different option in order to get support for your country. So yeah, this is an easy button. It's easy to solve. But if we fail at any moment inside that, you look at these minds, we're going to lose them. So that might help the people to understand like what's going on. So that was my 4 points.
Thank you so much. Okay.
The topic is very interesting, really. And as the director, as the hub, we are always trying to identify the concrete actions or policy recommendations on what exactly we can do. And I cannot help myself to think about, because as someone from military background, we always look from ends based means perspective, and I don't see that we have a clear, defined ends, because we refer to strategy as Ignacio, you highlighted. Do we have a strategy is one question, but what exactly we want? What exactly we want? That we want to stop Russia, China, or others information, disinformation campaign in there, so that we want them to buy our view. And then I think we need to be very open on this one. Yeah. Not to be seen as hypocrites or double standards. This is the common theme, because otherwise we are saying, okay, Russia, China is doing something there, so why you are concerned? Probably this is a challenge for us. This will be a challenge. And then also when it comes to fact checking, I don't think it's a working strategy, because you will be dragged into someone else's discourse. Either you create your own narrative or you are falling behind. And especially with the social media, I don't know, we have technical guys here, they know much better than us. But basically you are enforcing the message they are sending, because you are commenting, you are quoting them. And then in the end, you see that they are accessing to much more people, much wider communities. And I don't think this is a working strategy. Fact checking is fine for maybe a couple of things, but instead focus on what exactly we want. What is the message we are trying to send? I see this is a challenge, and then hopefully we will come up with good ideas on what are the things that we can do.
Yeah, General, that's a legit point. I wanted to mention it afterwards, but let me mention it here. Between Vilnius and Washington, the last two NATO summits, only a year apart, we have 750 words of political guidance, which deals exactly with Africa, and some of it deals with concretely the Sahel. The heads of state and government expect us to act. The three themes that are in the declarations are strategic competition, the recognition that China and Russia are here to, and I quote, undermine NATO's influence and destabilize the region. In the words of other panelists, unseat us, kick us out of the horse and replace us, because there was the argument, how can a newcomer establish themselves on a market where they haven't been in the past? Only by unseating those who have been on the market. Pervasive instability, that's a concern for NATO, and opportunities for engagement. Those are the three themes in the declaration. So arguably, we have political guidance and we need to deliver. And the hub, by the way, congratulations, is explicitly in the last summit declaration, along with the center in Kuwait, and along with another NATO initiative. So our friends in the NATO Public Diplomacy Division always take it the other way around. If the allies expect me to do something, let me give them let me give them something, because they might not be clear on what they know, what they want. So there's a rule for a good salesman and marketing person. Teach your customer to want what they need. So arguably, if we know what NATO needs in this region, and I think broadly political guidance, it's there. Now we have something to provide that comes out of interactions like this. Let us give this. And they are hungry for practical stuff. I led, among other things, a project in Jordan. Now, Jordan has been a potential strategic engagement opportunity in capital letters in the Middle East. A sea of turmoil, you have a sea of stability in Jordan. People in Stratcom are hungry to do something with Jordan. We have been giving it to them through the project. They applauded us and thanked us very much for what we have done. So assuming that the hub is creating the knowledge of what NATO needs, should need, could need, let's sell it, let's provide it. And the political decision is a different is a different thing. It's not what we are paid for, right? Here, our job is to generate feasible ideas. And on the gentleman, so this is to start with, and I'll gladly then come to more sort of practical, graspable recommendations as we go. And on the gentleman in the back, our friend, fact-checking and the use, formation, education, training, right? Whether something like this exists. Let me mention 3 things in passing. One is a US Africa Center initiative. They have a community of practice, and they go in workshop-like to nations around Africa, including in the west of Africa. They conducted a workshop in Côte d'Ivoire, for example, and they work with the Vilnius-based organization Debunk EU, and they go according to the EU methodology for identifying disinformation and how to counter it. And they are teaching local people to being able to categorize the stuff and to employ potential effective counter strategies. This is one. The other one, and that's something that is embedded almost, but essentially giving a space at the Stratcom Center of Excellence as well, but based in Washington, is the Atlantic Council's DFR lab, Digital Forensics Research Lab, and they educate digital Sherlocks in OSINT. How do you trace disinformation as it travels from one? How do you geolocate and stuff like this? So this is another example for OSINT-based fact-checking. The third one is in Slovakia, there is a portal called Demagog.sk, and they fact-check in near real time political discourse in the most prominent radio and TV debates. So you have anyone from prime minister to senior government official, and they have a methodology, and now AI should make all of this probably facilitate that even faster, because the job of a fact checker is to sort of check on someone else's thing. It's not to develop Stratcom, and I agree that Stratcom is the challenge rather than chasing the tail, but they have that methodology. And the last one is your own African Code for Africa, which works for Meta in many nations as fact checkers for Meta. Meta is short of people. They outsource some of that. You have worked with them, I understand. So Code for Africa, probably among several institutions, but for us in the community of interest that we have run out of Riga, they have been a very valuable partner. They are digital activists, trans-African. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you so much. 5 minutes, so I give a minute each. All right. Okay, I'll be nice too. Okay, so because we need to go on break and then we'll come back.
Yeah, I'm very much interested in the question by the general that I appreciate indeed, because that goes to the point, because we are NATO and we have to discuss what NATO might do regarding the Sahel and Africa in general. And I agree with what the general has mentioned. I fully agree that NATO has not a clear strategy regarding Africa, and more specifically regarding the Sahel. Why? Maybe because the last experience in Afghanistan, in Libya, even looking at what has happened with the French in the Barkhane operation. So all the lessons learned from these past operations, NATO operations or French operations, have taken us to the conclusion that it's better not to intervene in Africa, especially at the point when NATO is mostly focused in Ukraine. And to open a second scenario is not, maybe it's not a good idea. But we should do something, because otherwise the Sahel is going out of control. Is not only the Russian, but there are also instability produced by the terrorism and also migration, etc. And these are big concerns for our societies. Actually, in Europe, the biggest concern is what's going on in the Sahel regarding migration, even in this country. So we cannot put this consideration aside, because we have to tackle them. And we also feel that we are only addressing the point of the iceberg. So what might be the main objective, as the general mentioned, regarding Russian and Chinese in the Sahel, for me, it's very clear. We should take the Russians out of Africa. That should be, let's say, the strategy objective, starting with the Sahel. Do whatever we can to take the Russians out. The same that they are trying to do with us. They are trying to take us, the NATO, the Europeans, the Westerners, out of Africa. And we have to start with the strategic concept. In the strategic concept 2022, the only thing NATO said is concerning about these asymmetric threats is that terrorism is the biggest asymmetric threat or hybrid threat for NATO. But that is it. And that is not a strategy. And strategy, we have to say something else. So what might NATO say? Okay, at this moment, the Central Sahel, and it has been explained here extensively yesterday and even this morning, is lost for NATO. Is completely lost. It's very, very much difficult to get involved into Niger, Burkina Faso, or Mali. But we should look carefully at what is going on the Western Africa, because the biggest concern is not only the Sahel itself. It's just Russians, especially Russian more than Chinese, moving toward the West and getting access to the Atlantic Ocean through some of the 10 countries going from Nigeria, Benin and Togo to Mauritania. And if that happens, it's a big strategic challenge or even a strategic threat for NATO. We have to tackle that. We cannot say, okay, Africa is lost. Let's have some talking, some discussion, some fact-finding work, etc. But we have to do something else. And what might we do? Okay, we can learn from the Russian and the Chinese. I'm not saying that we are applying the same principles, but maybe we can use their own strategy.